Most Americans know George Soros as a funder of a number of American left-wing movements such as Occupy Wall Street, but in fact the billionaire's goals have always been bigger than one country. In 2017, the U.S. only received 15% of his Open Society Foundation's dedicated funding.
Only 15% of Soros's funding goes to U.S. institutions. It's international. It's a State Department thing, primarily faces outside.
Soros was active in fostering Eastern Europe's multiple color revolutions in nations including Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, and Ukraine, also supported by the U.S. government.
Also supported by the U.S. government. That's a key function here. That's how Soros gets first pick of the assets in the region. That's how he gets this privileged access. That's how you can have no bidders, a non-competitive auction to buy up assets during a privatization process or when a government turns over, and regulatory licenses for all the portfolio companies, access to the bond markets at a discount rate or an IMF subsidized rate, is because the government owes him favors because it's his NGOs and his civil society organizations that make that possible. It's a favors for favors relationship.
Soros's actions have also sometimes served to violate the will of the citizens. See his work in Romania. Soros-backed organizations have been active in Romania since 1990, the year after Romania's communist dictator was deposed. Soros poured $160 million into the country as of 2014. Measured relative to the size of the nation's economy, that's more money than he spent in America.
Soros spent $160 million on controlling the internal politics of Romania.
Soros-backed organizations have been active in Romania since 1990, the year after Romania's communist dictator was deposed. Soros poured $160 million into the country as of 2014. Measured relative to the size of the nation's economy, that's more money than he spent in America. After a fire killed multiple people in a former Bucharest factory-turned-nightclub, outrage mounted that corrupt bribed politicians had allowed the nightclub to ignore safety codes. On November 3, 2015, 30,000 protesters took to the streets demanding the resignation of Bucharest mayor and the nation's Prime Minister Victor Ponta. Corruption kills became their battle cry, a phrase popularized by Florin Bădiță, an activist who was trained at a Soros Foundation workshop where, quote, Soros manipulated me and taught me how to question the state, end quote. Claudio Crăciun, who led the protesters on a march to the city, received a fellowship from Soros's Open Society Institute Budapest, and many of the other protest leaders were also previously funded by Soros. On November 4th, Victor Ponta relented and stepped down. His replacement, Dacian Cioloș, appointed a number of Soros-connected activists to his cabinet. One problem: the Romanian people didn't actually want any of this. On a poll taken on November 6th, only 7% of respondents said that they held the government responsible for the tragedy. Just 12% blamed the political class in general. A whopping 69% even rated the government's response to the tragedy favorably. Somehow, in a country of 20 million people, less than 30,000 protesters with the sympathy of less than 15% of the population, Soros-trained activists managed to force the government to surrender. In America, we need to watch out for similar popular uprisings today. Just because they're made to look popular doesn't mean the polling bears that out. But such optics have served Soros' agenda well in Europe, and they can be made to do so here.
Capital Research Centers exposed Soros funding of left-wing movements and orgs in the U.S., Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, Color of Change. Only 15% of his dedicated funding went to the U.S., 85% to global projects. Soros has given particular focus to exporting political unrest to the former communist countries of Eastern Europe, including his native Hungary. In fewer than 25 years, Open Society Foundation has poured $1.6 billion into Central and Eastern Europe for democratic development. Spent $25 million on Hillary Clinton, $100 million on Biden. Uncle Sam joins Team Soros. The U.S. State Department often teamed up with Soros and Open Society Fund to promote democracy in Eastern European countries. This is exactly what we're just reading out with things like that WikiLeaks memo. This often consisted of targeting nationalist governments by infusing socially liberal propaganda through NGOs, Western media, influencing their elections. One example is the USAID reported meddling in Macedonia's elections in 2016. According to USAID's website, between 2012 and 2016, USAID gave $5 million to Open Society Foundation Macedonia. $5 million, a direct grantee. Judicial Watch reported that with the help of then-President Barack Obama's U.S. ambassador to Macedonia, the U.S. government spent millions of taxpayer dollars to destabilize the democratically elected center-right government by colluding with Soros. So USAID is actually funding Soros, and Soros is passing those funds to the people on the ground, the local politicians, the local judges, the local prosecutors, the local anti-corruption NGOs, the local media outlets, the local trade labor groups and unions. That puts this in an interesting light. Was that also happening in Lithuania? Did USAID also give Open Society Fund Lithuania funds? So when we go ahead and say, red alert, we need to shut down these newspapers who are criticizing anyone who's received funding from George Soros Open Society Fund, were they really getting USAID funds, or were they just were they really getting Open Society funds, or were they just distributing USAID funds? Did USAID fund Soros, and then Soros didn't even have to pay the groups out of his own pocket? Soros was spending your taxpayer money to bribe people with. I wonder what the total number of dollars for USAID is to Soros. Can anyone look that up on USA spending? Like the total amount? It's going to be hard to tally because there's going to be so many freaking grants in every country on earth. Yeah, it's hard to actually tally it all because you have to add up State Department, USAID, NED, probably NIH, HHS, National Science Foundation, probably Defense Department, Civil Military. Like, you're going to have so many different agencies, and it's not just to Open Society Foundation or Open Society Fund. It's going to be to all, like, their co-funded projects. Like, for example, East-West Management Institute is backed by Soros, but they probably also get funds from USAID. But look at this. USAID is paying Soros groups to advance Serbia's accession talks with their European Union, to fold them into the European Union, so that their goods will now trade in the EU market. Back to the markets. One NGO funded by the USAID Soros Alliance paid for the translation into Macedonian of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. So USAID paid to have Saul Alinsky street protest handbooks printed. How funny is that? The NGOs are filling a power vacuum left by the collapse of the Soviet Union. Mirel Palata, one of thousands of young Eastern Europeans to receive a scholarship from George Soros' Open Society Foundation, said the only requirement was that recipients return home after their study abroad ended. When Palata finished his year, 1998, at Kalamazoo College in Michigan, he went back to his home country of Romania, obtained a PhD in sociology, and served as press secretary for the former Romanian Prime Minister Victor Ponta. At the time, Soros did me a favor. He hoped to see the favor returned, that I'd feel indebted and become one of his minions. So they're paying kids young. This is like, what's that movie? The Departed.
When I was your age, they would say we could become cops or criminals. What I'm saying is this. When you're facing a loaded gun, what's the difference?
Okay, basically, so one of the cops is like groomed from an early age to go to cop school, go to the FBI, and become a mole within the FBI for the mobster. And there's a great montage where it's like Leo DiCaprio going through the police academy the regular way, and the FBI guy going through the FBI academy, with his strings being pulled by the mobster and just like slacking off and having his easy street. And that's like these Soros Foundation funds grooming these young kids to go to universities. And again, that's why they spend so much on this education. These exchange programs, you're going to have your mentor. Your mentor's going to hook you up with the job. Now you're in a job promoting democracy, and you are one more part of that State Department Soros infantry to control the internal politics in the direction that you're getting paid to promote. I'll find that scene somewhere. But, all right, let's get back to it. Research. Today, however, Palata has mixed feelings about the opportunities that Soros provided him. In an interview with DC News, he credited Soros's praiseworthy scrupulousness in building an influential Eastern European network, but argued it works against Romania's national interests. Do you think? Thank God I'm not part of the Soros network. I'm part of those who love their country. Many Romanians feel the same. This man and the foundations and structures he has set up since the 90s has furthered evil. So the Social Democrat Party, again, that's the left wing. The country's Social Democrat Party passed a law in November, joining a number of Eastern European governments seeking to curb Soros' influence in their internal affairs. It requires NGOs to report in detail their revenue sources and strips them as eligibility for taxpayer funding as public utilities if they engage in political advocacy. This is standard 501c3 and FARA stuff. Of course, the State Department, you poke the NGOs and the State Department will squeal. Romanian opposition parties and NGOs accuse the PSD of using anti-Soros rhetoric as cheap propaganda. But does it hold merit? The Soros footprint. Romania's communist dictator Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena died by a firing squad on Christmas Day, 1989. The day they were buried, on December 30th, Romania's first NGO, the Group for Social Dialogue, formed on the steps of the Bucharest International Hotel. Less than a week later, Soros paid the group a visit. Oh, no. Internationalist, neoliberal economists, I don't feel so good. So the head of state gets killed by firing squad. The day he's buried, the first NGO pops up. A couple days after that, George Soros personally visits the NGO. Do you think Soros had insider trading, had inside knowledge about the turnover of government, and was working actively with the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Embassy in Bucharest to help establish that NGO? The Group for Social Dialogue's founders included leading professors, philosophers, journalists, activists, the former editor of the official newspaper. I think I was the first civilian plane that landed in Bucharest, Soros told Romanian TV talk show host in 2005. George Soros was the first civilian plane that landed in Bucharest after the fall. Do you think Soros funded the toppling of that government? Do you think that his civil society network or dissident network was working hand in glove with the State Department to orchestrate that fall, that he was on the first civilian plane? You think he just got lucky with winning the lotto on the plane tickets? What do you think the State Department cables looked like in 1988 talking about Soros? This is another thing. You're talking about declassifying federal records. We should see everything the State Department said about Soros. Imagine that. Every CIA cable, every State Department cable, every USAID classified document that mentions Soros. Imagine if that was declassified. Holy shit. Shortly after landing, Soros made his way to the NGO headquarters, the former Romanian Communist Youth Building that the new regime lent to the group, where he met with the charter members. Despite its title, it had little chance of sparking social dialogue among the blue-collar rank and file in Romania. The organization's would-be elite ruling class watched in dismay as, a year later, Romanian voters voted for the ex-communist by more than 80%. That's hysterical. Wow. So they got outvoted. So that's why Soros doubled down. Got this prime real estate on the Black Sea. And they didn't go down easy. They voted against the State Department Soros blob. So that's why they have to increase the funding so there's more control structures. Because otherwise they'd lose 80 to 20 in the vote. Because they don't want it. That's why you need to spend so much on it. The following month, however, Soros launched his own NGO in Romania, the Soros Foundation, with an initial budget of 1.5 mil. Until at least the late 1990s, it remained the country's only grant-making NGO. Interesting. So that means grant making, meaning it's paying people, it's getting people on payroll. Which is where it gets really nasty, because then you're financially beholden to them. Over the next 4 years, the foundation worked with the Romanian Ministry of Education to introduce textbooks authored by its own members into Romanian schools, controlling the hearts and minds of the young people. By the mid-90s, its budget had grown to 10 million. And the group expanded its mission to include communication, the media, culture, the arts, and the public health system. In 1997, it changed its name to Foundation for an Open Society. Open Society Foundation. Although the Open Society Foundation staffers gained a reputation for arrogance, it arguably accomplished more with an average of 10 to 12 million than the USAID did with 30 to 40 million. Note again this relationship between USAID and Soros. USAID sought to rapidly democratize and liberalize the post-communist country. Soros, meanwhile, understood that before a young, white-collar liberal elite can guide a country, that a young, white-collar liberal elite must first exist. So he's getting them while they're young, getting them into positions of power, so that you have all these assets in power, your recruits. In addition to sponsoring Romanian students, also founded the Central European University, CEU, which attracted the students, also sponsored hundreds of Romanians to attend conferences. By the turn of the century, it was 16 mil. It then transitions programs into 12 splinter NGOs that found additional sources of Western funding to supplement their Soros dollars. A new umbrella organization, the Soros Open Network Romania, formed in 2000. As Romania moved towards EU membership, the Soros network began engaging in more overt political advocacy. Meanwhile, many of Soros' Romanian colleagues and allies gained prominent influence within the government. Sandra Prelog left her position as communications director at Newsweek in 1990 to organize and lead the Romanian Soros Foundation, becoming its first executive director. In 1999, working as an advisor to the Romanian president, Constantinescu, published her first book about the Open Society Foundation. GDS, that's that dialogue society, that first NGO. Also served as president of the Soros Foundation Romania Council. He later became the chief of staff to the prime minister. Wait, my sound just cut off for some reason. Okay. Okay. Took an active role in the Rosia Montana activism. After Romania entered the EU, Soros saw his vision for the country largely accomplished. When the economic crisis of 2008 hit, Romania's GDP, which had been the fastest growing in Europe. Interesting. You guys will send me some links. Hold on a second. Oh my God, yeah. Of course. And USAID and state and NED. Yeah, International IDEA. That's funded by the State Department and USAID. International IDEA. It's a partner group with NED. Anytime you see NED, you see Soros. The same thing. Yeah, this is just a way to get legal control over elections. To be able to do what they did to George Askew. Yes, look at this. International IDEA said it saw Open Society Fund and USAID as its primary project funders. I talked about this all the time. I talked about this group on Joe Rogan. I talked about them on Patrick Bet David. Yeah, here I wrote about it right here. Back in mid-2022. International IDEA is it's part of how we rigged the 2022 election in Brazil. This is one of the main election censorship organs in Brazil. Funded by USAID, the National Down for Democracy, the DNC branch, and George Soros Open Society. You guys have probably heard me play this clip a bunch of times before. 2.5 years ago I wrote this. So of course they're involved in the Democracy Shield. Okay. Okay, so after a string of nativist parties started making noise, Soros feared that populism could undo his nearly 2 decades of investment, so he spent another $100 million on NGOs in the region. He also urged the EU to provide top-up funding. In addition to direct funding from the Open Society Foundation, Soros has given millions to Romanian NGOs indirectly through the Trust for Civil Society in Central and Eastern Europe. In 2001, Open Society Institute, along with 5 other philanthropies, Rockefeller, Ford, Moat, and the German Marshall Fund, that's the U.S. government. It's funded by the State Department and USAID. In addition to the 12 NGOs that originally formed the Soros Open Network, dozens more have sprung from them. God, it's like a decision tree, or it's like a funnel out. The first time I ever left Romania, everybody who was on such a grant goes, "Oh yeah, I remember my Soros grant, my Soros trip." He left in his wake a loyal army of grateful civil society soldiers. Yep, that's right. Okay, mass movements. Whoa. Okay, wait. Incidentally, he led the Romanian NGO APD, which was formed by the CIA, right? NDI, the DNC branch of the National Network for Democracy, the intelligence cutout. And it formally entered the Soros network. It's remained one of its most prominent organizations. So Soros is tied to the hip to the NDI in Romania. Of course, how could it be any other way? Oh, so he brags about it. My foundations, brags Soros, contributed to democratic regime change in Slovakia, Croatia, and Yugoslavia. Throughout the 1990s, the Clinton administration worked hand in glove with Soros to mold Eastern European policy. I would say that Soros' policy is not identical to the foreign policy of the U.S. government, but it's compatible with it. Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot told The New Yorker in 1995, "It's like working with a friendly independent entity, if not a government. We try to synchronize our approach with Germany, France, Great Britain, and with George Soros." This is the fucking Deputy Secretary of State saying State Department policy has to be synchronized with George Soros. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that an incredible quote? We have to synchronize our foreign policy with George Soros because he's got the money to make it happen, and his network and his banker friends.